Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. It's Catherine O'Neill. Awake at 6 a.m. And yes, I already have coffee. And before Larry starts sharing his landscaping things, I need your help. Stay alert, stay curious, and call us for your question. Let's wake up this Saturday together. He's coming out right now, Larry.
Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. Yes, more coffee, always more coffee. That's this time of the morning, getting going. If you have a question, you want to call us during the time of our show. If you're starting out on your pond, your pergola, you're trying to make your chamarzo grow faster, or your vegetable garden, chili peppers, to getting them going. Easy. You want to give us a call at 855-765-1045, 855-765-1045. As we're going through the garden, recovering from damage this winter, I think the coldest it's gotten 50 years. And sometimes we can't get things to really bloom again like they were. I got a question about plumerias. I know many people have plumerias, and they probably took some serious damage. And to get them going again, you got to make sure they get the right type of fertilizer. Plumerias are heavy eaters, and they do not like nitrogen, so you want to have the lowest amount of nitrogen, very low amount of nitrogen. And they want to have high phosphorus, but that'd be the first thing to get them going and to get blooming again. And the next thing is, a lot of times people want to get their plants, growing well, and they think about water. And that's not always a solution. We've got to remember some of these plants like bougainvillea, plumeria, some agaves, echeveria, these plants like it on the dry side. And they come from areas that they experience dry and a wet season, and they need to have that in order to bloom well. Like if you can't get if you have a bougainvillea in a container, it's a little more difficult when they're in the ground because you can't always control the water, but you can turn off the irrigation. If you have a bougainvillea in a container, they're very easy to get them to bloom. What I do is, here I'm going on a sidetrack, is just quit watering them. Quit watering them and let them completely dry out, and the leaves are dropping. And then I would water and fertilize again, and it will be covered with flowers for the rest of the season. Often, every time it stops blooming, that's what I do. The same thing with plumeria. They like it dry on the dry side. And then once you get them all dried out, then water 1 or 2 times and fertilize every 2 weeks, and they should bloom. The sunlight requirement is going to be 6 to 8 hours. That would be the things that would stop them from blooming or can't get them to bloom. But, if you had winter damage, and you trimmed off the tops, I don't know if you did or you did not, trimmed off the tops of your plumerias, that's the blooming tip. So it will take more time for that tip to develop again. So if you cut off the tips in the late winter, early spring, that's the blooming portion, and that will delay it from blooming again. Okay, that's exactly what is happening on the plumerias. So if you're applying too much water, high nitrogen fertilizer to get your plumeria to come back, or you're not giving it enough sunlight, you're going to have issues with it. I mean, plumerias, the advantage of plumerias, they can grow in very tight containers. I mean, they if you have one in a container, that's great, because if we have another, of course, this is the coldest it's been in 50 years. If we have another cold incident, you can always just roll them right into the garage. What I do with plumeria, with bougainvillea, if we have really severe cold, and I roll right into the garage, give them about a quart of water a month, and then I pull them out. Okay. And then I put them in the shade because I don't want them to get sunburned. Because these people, just a little sidetrack here, the people who pull their plants from the outside, they're in the inside, and you put them outside, and you think they're going to like that. They don't like that, because it's just like human beings. They're going to get sunburned from that, because they only make enough chlorophyll for the type of sunlight they're receiving. And you put them in the sun, go from the inside of the house or a shade condition, you put them in the sun, they're going to get sunburned. They're going to get damaged. They won't like that. You put them in the shade a couple days, and then you acclimate, and then you move them a half a day shade, then move in the sun. So that's what I do when I bring them out in the winter. I put them in the shade, give them some water, fertilizer, then move them next day, move them in a partial sunlight, and then after that into the full sun. But you could do that to keep them from burning during the cold cold snap. Now, because we're in El Nino this year, we are probably not gonna have any. Predict warmer warmer weather in the winter. Yeah, warmer weather in the winter. So we're gonna have a warmer winter. We've had some very, kind of strong winters, last year, the year before, the year before that. We've had, usually we got like 5 or 6 years of great winter weather where you barely get a frost, and then now we've had, some severe 20-degree days. But, I was reading that I know we think it's getting warmer in Florida, but not in Antarctica. They had a record low of 119.5, minus 119.5 Fahrenheit was a low in Antarctica. So I think I think it was a Fahrenheit. Yeah, whatever it was, Celsius or Fahrenheit, that's cold. You're not going to be out there running around in your short sleeves, not for very long, and not for if you do, you're not going to be telling anybody about it. You know, so you know. When we're going through the garden, we've really mastered. If you're thinking about just having a rose garden, a dedicated rose garden, definitely want to call us. We are the masters of how to get your roses to grow. But the we looking at our roses that we are maintaining at this time of the year. I mean, I'm only seeing one or two black spots, completely disease-free, producing flowers. I just was amazed that we have some of our David Austin roses, which they usually go heat dormant in the winter. I mean, not winter, but I get this right. More coffee. During the summer, because in August we can have it hot, up to almost 100 degrees, and they are producing flowers. I mean, I just looked at one we just cut back in probably June. It's back there producing flowers again. It's probably got at least 20 roses bud set, even though the flowers aren't as quite as big as they are in the spring, but they are producing roses. And so, roses, one thing about roses, they do require a little bit more fertilizer, a little bit more care. But once you get the nutrients set for your soil condition, okay, if you're gardening in low fertility soil, once you understand what kind of soil condition you get, you can make them grow, and you won't have any fungicide or pesticide. We have not sprayed any of our roses with any fungicide, which, being a rose grower for over 10 years and had 350 roses in my own personal garden, that's the reason I quit growing roses, because I didn't want to spray a fungicide on my roses every week or 2 weeks. I had to spray, if I wanted them to look good, and otherwise I'd get black spot. But of course, I didn't understand. I understood somewhat the quality of the soil makes a rose, but I didn't understand the concept of having all those 8 trace elements available or for photosynthesis. I didn't have my complete understanding of photosynthesis and how plants are resist disease, how they resist disease. And once I got that, it became easy street. And the only thing I think we had one rose that had some Japanese beetles on it, but that quickly went away. But so you're thinking about, if you don't give up on roses, roses are an important gardening plant. They produce flowers. They're the roses kind of fell out of grace because of that reason, but they produce flowers, year round. And the drift rose is, of course, drift roses are more disease resistant, but they still do not do as well in our soil type if you're not amending the soil somewhat and creating a good environment for them as far as making sure they're getting all the trace elements and nutrients they need to be heat resistant and disease resistant. It is I'm posting, we're doing video shorts. If you wanted to go to Larry's Garden, we are posting our, radio show on YouTube. And if you want to listen to it in the week, if you missed it or you missed a section, you want to re-listen to it. And we are posting shorts of some of the projects we do, some of the plants we grow, and and we are going to post some things about the roses, how well they look, and their pictures of it. But they're absolutely great. And because a rose, there's nothing like if a rose on a fence. You have a fence that's not very pretty. You know, they have the first day of you build your fence is the best day it's going to ever have. You know, I've seen some good, well-built fences, you know, but they're not going to be the common variety that you get from a fence company, you know, the common variety. You know, they're going to be saggy in a few years. They're going to be, you know, not doing well. But you can cover them with some roses, and roses do well in those conditions. You know, just putting a wire along the fence, 2x4s, you know, to tie them off lightly, and you can have a beautiful rose. Some of the great ones that you know, will grow along a fence line. You know, they have two different. We'll break it into two different categories. You know, ones that are continuously blooming, ones that are repeat bloom. Roses are broken down into that, and that kind of those categories, you know, one-time blooming, repeat blooming, and continuous. You know, the repeat blooming is, you know, they'll have a little dry section, you know, where there's no flowering, and then they'll have a flowering. Continuous means as soon as they get done blooming, they're going to be blooming again. You know, they're just all the time. But, you know, this is the Home and Garden Show with Larry O'Neill. We'll be right back with you. More great garden talk. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living. And if you have a question about your roses, about your vegetable garden, your ponds, your pergola, you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. That's slow enough right there. And I had some coffee. Maybe my brain will fully kick in here. But talking about climbing roses, you know, roses have kind of fallen from grace, and there's nothing that is more appealing than if you were walking up to the front door, have a rose covered wall, a rose covered entranceway. I used to have sombrelle, which is a French origin, white rose covering the porch. It was, I mean, I can't remember how many compliments I got on that rose, but it was a repeat bloomer. But it was a little on the thorny side, I got to admit, but it was very, very a beautiful rose with fragrance. And some of these roses are very fragrant. So if you can have one, you know, covering your fence, where to put them, it would be one place, covering a wall, covering the front porch, you know, entrance of the front porch, on the wall, the front of the house. You know, it's depending on what kind of house you have. You know, you could, you know, create a temporary arbor either by building a wooden arbor, buying a wooden, not arbor, trellis, coffee, trellis, putting a trellis up there, and you know, tying the rose to the trellis. And it's nothing says you're welcome more than having a rose at the front, and even roses lining your walkway. I used to have roses about probably about 100 of them, lining 50 on one side, 50 on the other side. I packed them in there, and they lining the walkway, and they were just absolute summer snow. And I've been trying to buy that rose, and you know, I pulled them all out. Now I can't find it. You know, it's a floribunda, means it has many roses, small roses on the tips, and but it was prolific. I mean, the first spring bloom was I've never seen a rose bloom like that. Of course, they were well tended, but they were just absolutely solid in color. But plenty of compliments on it. You know, roses, you know, add an element to any flower bed, garden, anywhere in any position. In containers, they do well in containers. The smaller ones, the shrub roses, do very well in containers. And if you want color all season long, there's hardly anything that will do like that and be there for you every single season. So you plant it once, it's going to be there, you know. And then you could fill in some Alyssium during the winter or spring, cascading petunias, like what was it called? Bubblegum petunia, which is the pink bubblegum petunia, is a unbelievable petunia. Blooms all summer. Our pink bubblegum petunias we have in containers for our client, we maintain their whole garden landscape, is they're still blooming, which is normal. Most petunias at this time of the year are done completely, you know, because of the high temperature. And that's one of the best petunias if you have a chance to get one. If you see any of the bubblegum series, they're definitely worth purchasing, and they are going to produce a lot of flowers. The pink being the best variety. But so roses are Another a couple different roses that you could put climbing roses is going to be Dublin Bay, New Dawn, Eden, then if you're looking for a rose, there's nothing like a rose on an arbor or a rose on a pergola. There's nothing. If you have a pergola and you want to have the absolute best, a rose on a pergola is going to or an arbor is going to, really beautify, be the anchor of your garden. Rose, and then you can even add a clematis. Clematis paniculata is a great called sweet autumn, but we'll go into that. We'll talk about the rose there. I'm going to sidetracking again, but one of the white ones that was really beautiful. That's it was originally brought over here from China, but it's actually is acclimated or it became part of our natural floor landscape is Cherokee rose. It's a one-time bloomer, and when it blooms in profusion. These one thing about a one-time bloomer, it blooms in just a magnificent profusion. A showstopper. People will stop to look at it, especially when it's well tended. If it's well tended, it will be solid color, and it will last. Maybe depends on the weather, 30 to 45 days. This depends on the weather. Now, if you have a large pergola, in order to protract the flowering time, you can add two. And what you do is to make it into, let's say, 60 or 90 days of color. You start fertilizing one of them a little sooner. And that will, I mean, that will do it. You start fertilizing one of them a little sooner, and then maybe 3 weeks later, start on the other. So the other one's going to be ahead of the other one. And so that's how we do in a perennial garden. If you have, let's say, 60 coreopsis, full moon, what I would do is if I wanted to protract the bloom, of course, coreopsis, that's the wrong plant to do it. Talk about because that blooms from June to the first frost. How about Erigeum? We'll talk about Erigeum. It's a kind of a powdery blue native plant. Got an alert, unfortunately, these, a lot of times people spend a lot of this money on spraying mosquitoes, with permethins and you know, like anytime you use the same chemical over and over again, it's getting to be completely ineffective. They see in areas in Florida where the population, of the mosquitoes it's only affecting it's only lethal to 6.5% of the population. They're getting more and more resistant. 60 times more of the chemical and concentration has to be sprayed. So if you're spraying I don't know exactly in the local area, Jacksonville, but it is definitely some population are completely resistant. Now, the Asian mosquito is not as problematic. It still has some the effect on that mosquito, but our indigenous type, it's just going down to zero. It's going to, and I would say another 5 to maybe shorter than that, there will be completely immune to it. Just like, what years ago we used to have chinch bugs. People used to call us about chinch bugs, and they said they put down chinch bug insecticide on their chinch bug population they had in their yard, and that was they thought it was going to take care of the problem. It didn't because, remember we used to have Durazban. It was another chemical that they could alternate between, and put Durazban, bifenthrin. But the problem with bifenthrin is that all the chinch bugs are now in our area are completely immune to bifenthrin. What one chinch bug or one mosquito or a couple mosquitoes survive the insecticide, they now become the genetically dominant group of mosquitoes. And so they're in just a matter of time if you're not alternating the insecticide before they become immune. And just like when they used to be Flortan, well, the one big thing about Flortan was that it was chinch bug resistant. So you could plant Flortan, you never had to worry about chinch bugs. But the chinch bug population, one or two would survive on Flortan. And then that chinch bug population became the dominant population. So resistance in plants only last about 7 years. So after that, they're back to ground zero, But so if you're having your mosquitoes sprayed, I would check, make sure, think about is this being effective? Spending that extra cost to spray in there, it's not always it's not effective for very long. if you're not alternating the insecticide. Going back to the roses, where roses are a great element in any garden, and using them correctly, providing good soil. If you're having a rose garden, you need to make sure you want to have a rose at your entrance or on your arbor or your pergola, anywhere in your landscape, which they occupy a star position, when especially a group of them. When you can plant them in a group, they're going to be more potent as far as their visual look on them, and the fragrance and is going to be more powerful. You got to make sure you plant them in a moisture retentive soil. They like moisture. They got to have moisture. So in the sandy soil, you're going to have to augment the soil. Compost, planting mix, any of those things could be used. Wood chips on, ground up leaves and wood chips. You have that when you have ground up wood, that's the carbon element. And if you have ground up leaves, that's the, nitrogen element. And you got to have those two together to create compost. So, if you want to take some, material that you have from your landscape, you want to put top dress out around your roses. Don't waste it. And it's cheap, so if you're chipping up some wood, put some of that over there. You can use just wood chips from the compost, from your mulch, and then mix in some greens and put it on top of that, and it will decompose. And eventually over time, you'll create a really rich soil. And then what we do, for quick results, we're going to use Miracle Rose fertilizer. We use a organic biostimulant, bacteria and fungus, in our applications, a large amount of sugar or molasses in there. We definitely do that, and a couple applications of that. And then we use fish emulsion. Fish emulsion is what we use as the bulk of our fertilization is going to be fish emulsion and rose Miracle Grow rose fertilizer or Stay Green rose fertilizer. It's the right balance. But the trace elements, without the trace elements, it's going to be a failure. Okay, your roses are going to have disease. But if you spray the trace elements, like chlorine, you've heard me say it, but just until you're sick of it, chlorine, sulfur, molybdenum, zinc, manganese, magnesium, and all those things, and it got to be in there in your trace elements. You can use some, palm fertilizer by Sunnyland's palm fertilizer. That as a granular application. We spray ours. You can spray them, and you're going to have a successful rose garden. You're going to have roses that will thrive not do spectacular as they do in the spring or in the fall, but they'll look good mid-season, and they'll produce flowers. And so if you do all those things, you can have a great rose garden. And I think it's a great plant. It's colorful. It's full of flowers all season long, and you cannot go wrong. And there's some great companion plants you could plant with it. So when they're not, to cover up their legs, a lot of times they're not as full on the bottom, and you have calamint, which is a great plant for the dog days of summer. And the dog days of summer are almost over. The dog days of summer are from July to August 11th. I mean, the reason they call it the dog days of summer is because Canis Major, the star in Canis Major, rises at the same time as the sun rises. And the Romans realize that, and they know, hey, this is super hot now. This must be the dog days of summer. That's because Sirius is the star, which comes from the major dog constellation. I guess that's the exact translation, Canis Major. But you can lavender, Russian sage, calamint, and Goodwin lavender is a very good lavender for our climate zone. So, putting it over an arbor. Another thing you could do on roses, let's say if you had a one-time bloomer, Cherokee or Cherokee Rose, Seven Sisters, which is a beautiful pink rose, is to put in a clematis, like Clematis paniculata, clematis. There's several different Sweet Autumn is one of them, and then Sweet Love is another one. The guy in Poland hybridized a kind of a purple one, and we've got them. They're just great, and they bloom in the late fall. So a late fall or late summer. It just depends on how much fertilizer they got, but they're a great one. But we're going to go to Joe. He has a question about collard greens. Hello, Joe. This is the best time right now. If you're starting with seed, are you starting with seed or you're starting with plant? Okay, yeah. If you can get them right now, this is the best time. If they're young, they'll be perfect. Yeah, this time, perfect time to plant. collard greens, yeah. And so the winter when they get winter, it'll be nice and, a little there's not gonna be as cold this year, so you may not get that sweetness, but, this is the perfect time to plant vegetables. What type of tomatoes did you plant this time of year? Oh, okay, okay, great, and it did good for you all the way up to what time? Alright, so you got them all the way you done good, you got them all the way to August, producing fruit, that's amazing. That's the best thing about growing tomatoes, you got few tomato bushes, you got 3 or 4, there's plenty to give away, and that always creates that nice community feel. Yeah, we put in our fall tomato crop ourselves, you know what I mean? So we're having a fall crop of tomato, and we just started them about a week ago. But a great question, Joe, and you have a great rest of your day. Thank you then. You know what? A lady calls me, asked me about why her tomatoes aren't doing that, why she can't get any fruit. And the particular reason why you cannot get tomato fruit when the temperature gets above 70. This is somewhat variable in the individual plant types in the genetics of the individual plant, is that the pollen becomes extremely sticky. So bee or any of the pollinators and the wind, if they're wind pollinated, a lot of tomatoes are wind pollinated, that the wind blowing over there moves the flower, they have both male and female, and the wind breezy moves the pollen from one plant to the other, it becomes extremely sticky, so it cannot pollinate. That's the exact reason why tomatoes will not do as well when the nighttime temperature is over 70 degrees. When the nighttime temperature is over 70 degrees. Now, some are, they've hybridized them and make them more viable. That's make for our temperature, and there's some are better for that. But that's the exact reason why they don't produce fruit during high nighttime temperatures. No problem in California if you're in California, because they're not, but only in the southeast when we experience those eastern seaboard nights, versus the west coast. But we're talking about clematis, and clematis is a great addition to any garden or any landscape. And if you love a landscape, you love sitting out there, even in August, we sit out there, enjoy the landscape. The many clients of ours, which we're having those flower perennial gardens, whether it be a tropical garden or would it be a parterre garden or Japanese garden. It's when it's cool in the morning and cool in the afternoon. Late afternoon, it's a great time to be outside, and that's why we live in lower southeast. We want to enjoy that sunlight and being outside. But on our perennial garden, many things are still doing well. In the middle of August, which is the whole concept of you can't grow a garden like our landscape exactly or similar to the gardens that grow in Virginia and up north in Boston is a dead concept. If you prepare the soil and the plant has all the nutrients that is necessary, whether it be perennial shrub, unless there's some genetic restrictions, because of the temperature restrictions or needing cold temperature in the winter. You cannot have basically the same thing they have up north. There's plenty of indigenous plants that are great flowering plants you could substitute. Very good. Growing your own is better, and it is enjoyable experience. You plant the seed, you get it grow, water it, and then boom, you have, and then you'll have plenty to share because in a small garden you can produce enough to feed one side of the street. You know what I mean? Basically, he said, uh, the last gentleman called, he had produced, I think he said 8 tomato plants, and they all the relatives, all the neighbors ate tomatoes. Same thing with eggplant. I mean, if you like eggplant, that's a 5 plants will keep everybody in eggplant for all summer long, all the way up to the last frost. And good fertilization on those things. They love fish emulsion. And it's amazing how fast you'll see a small fruit in the beginning of the week, and by the end of the week, it's almost ready to pick. I mean, that's how fast they can grow in this high temperature. But in the garden, we're talking about, creating an element, always to, make something look great. In the dog days of summer, if you have a perennial garden, there's some plants that the dog days of summer are a little hard, because it's a high temperature and plants get a little weary, and they're waiting to bloom in the fall, or you have your spring bloomers, and there's that middle area from around July to August 11th. But there's some plants that you could put in there no matter what the temperature is, no matter what the weather conditions, whether it's 100 degree or, or we're having a drought, that will, no matter what they'll do, they'll produce color, flower, they'll look vigorous and vibrant, and they'll always be worthy of a place in the garden. And all coreopsis, the Big Bang series, uptick coreopsis, once they start blooming in around June, they'll just start blooming in June and they'll bloom all the way to the season and they will not stop blooming. No, if you fertilize or you don't fertilize. If you fertilize, they'll bloom more. If you don't fertilize, they'll be less. Short growing, only about maybe 2 foot, a foot and a half tall. Some are even smaller than that. All of them are worthy of a place in the garden. Now, some of them are a little less vigorous as far as the flowers capacity, but the ones in the yellow range and the red range and the pink and the whites are a little less vigorous, a little less flower productive. What it'll be. And, those will bloom during the dog days of summer. Calamint neptia, which is will flower. It's be surprisingly great, but is adapt to growing in the lower southeast. Walker's Low nepta is another great one that will bloom all summer long. Agastic purple haze is another one. Obedient plant and the cup plant. These plants, no matter what the temperature is, they'll look good. They'll attract, all kinds of bees and butterflies, and little or no care for them. If you want a little better, you put a little care. But if you don't want put anything in there, they're still going to look good. Salvias are all the ones, uh, will do well in the heat. Most of all the salvias do well in the heat. You don't have to be too selective. There is some varieties that are shade, want some little bit of a shade, out here, we're not getting much shade. We're getting intense sunlight. And you just fertilize through the summer a little bit, What is the quickest way there's two different ways you could do compost and miracle grow, a little bit of miracle grow for quick acting, or you can use some urea formaldehyde, put some down one time uh, and then a little bit of fish emulsion. So there's two different methodologies. You say you wanted to do, quick acting, you want quick results, you want the plant to move forward quickly, you use some liquid fertilizer, but it doesn't stay around very long. If you want something that hangs or hangs in there for a long time. You want to use urea formaldehyde, but you want to combine that with fish emulsion and bacterial mycorrhizal. It makes a big difference in the tropical garden too. In the tropical garden, it makes a big difference on any plant. But so these are the ways to come get through the dog days of summer, and then as soon as it cools down, and we are almost on August 11th. August 11th marks that deadline of the dog days of summer ends, and the sunlight is getting less and less. And plants sense that, and I can immediately tell of the fall bloomers. We're gonna have fall bloomers, Helianthus. Let me see, Boltona. Just a multitude of the fall bloom asters. All of them are getting ready to pushing up new growth. All of them are getting ready to show well for the fall. So fall can be as beautiful as spring, but knowing the type of plants, understanding them, and that's what we're here to help you with. If you're thinking about starting a perennial garden, or you want perennials to be mixed in with your landscape, plant once and never worry about it again, you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. Are we planting in the summer? Absolutely. We're planting in the summer. I don't if it's We won't plant bare roots, to say that. We won't do that if we don't have to. If there's somebody out there tending them and being very careful, then you can. But they just, we want to skip over that. But planting plugs, we're planting 4-inch and 2-inch perennial. No problem, long as they're getting water. The only thing changes is the water requirement. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden, Landscape, and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living, whether it be your plants, anything that's going on in the garden, your grass, your tree. If you have a question, if something's perplexing you, or you have some good news, some ideas that you came to you and you've been applying them and they work great, we like to hear about them. You want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. And, we planted watermelon, which is amazing, about a month and some odd weeks ago, and we already have fruit on the watermelon. How's the watermelon doing, Catherine?
They are doing great. We have many flowers and one fruit now.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah,
We're already getting our
I'm
fruit.
so happy.
Yes, we're already getting our fruit on there. What size are they? About the size of a
Oh, I don't
baseball,
know.
the soft size?
Yes, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
About the size of a large softball. That's pretty quick. We got watermelon out there and uh, already producing quick and which is amazing. And how the chili peppers. I looked by the chili peppers the other day, and they just looked.
Yeah.
How they do?
Oh, we have a sweet more ají habanero.
Habanero. And how many? We got a abundance of fruit on those, or
Yes, many fruit, around maybe 30 or 4
30 or 40?
fruits. Yes, 30 or 40 fruit.
Okay, yeah, because I saw that when I was just walking by them. I mean, one chili or pepper had the bush had completely turned red. It was loaded with them. And what the habanero, and of course, for those who like hot peppers, we dicing them up, put them in a little bit of honey, you get that spicy sauce. And uh, what have you been using for fertilizer?
I use fish emulsion and mineral.
Oh, well, that's a great thing. And we've had no disease on. Oh, that's basically what we're using on the watermelon, and we're using a little bit of more phosphorus on that because of the high fruit, the fruiting of the plant. But the watermelon are taken off 30 days, and they're already producing fruit. I mean, we're talking about overnight. These things have got. We see them emerging. There were seedlings, and boom, and now coming and cascading over everywhere. And we have them in a 200-gallon container. We took from a palm tree that we planted, and it just it's absolutely taken off. Just taken off. The maybe it's the right planting time or the right humidity and heat, but they have gone crazy. And so we're gonna have a bumper crop, just like the gentleman growing the tomatoes. We're gonna have plenty to give to everybody. The ice cream watermelon from the Botswana ice cream watermelon. I'm anxious to try that. We did. I think we got Alibaba in there too, which is one of the ones we've grown for years, like, over and over again. It's a great watermelon for our climate. But the peppers are doing. We got our crops of tomatoes in there. We plenty of things going on in the vegetable garden. This is the time you want to plant your fall blooming. And if you want a carving pumpkin, I always forget to mention it until the time you need it, but when you're thinking about it. But this is the time to plant carving pumpkins. If you want a carving pumpkin, a jack-o'-lantern, or anything for the fall, for your fall season, this is the time to plant them so you'll have one in time for that. And remember, pumpkin, they can be somewhat stored, and so if you get a quick maturation because of temperature and the weather, you you can store them. Some of the pumpkin can store up to about 30 to 60 days. Uh, this is the time to get your fall vegetable crops in. There's so many things to do. I was just reading John Chapman. He was Johnny Appleseed. He actually has trees that are still growing, and I think they said that his family lives on that same farm 9 generations ago. He apple tree. His father, he asked his father, according to the story, that what he should do, and he said, plant apple seeds, and that's exactly what he did. And he became a millionaire, actually, because he went into the Ohio Valley and planted apple seeds all there before the people arrived in the Ohio Valley. And you remember, the Italians drink wine because they mix wine with the water because the water was, no good, because people didn't understand the biology going on in water, and you drink water, you could get very sick from it. But in America, we drink apple cider mixed with water. Apple cider is how we dealt with the water not being good. So he became a millionaire, actually a millionaire, but he lived a very modest life. He didn't, live high style, but when he had all the acres and acres of apples that he had been planting, and all of a sudden, all these people appeared in the Ohio Valley, and boom, he was in business. In the vegetable uh, crops, you need pollinators, and you, unlike, most people know that we have many different types of bees and wasps in our area, in our state, and actually, the mason bee, and they can be attracted to your garden, or if you need pollinators, the mason bee is a better pollinator than the honeybee. I think that people, because they relate more to the honeybee because it produces honey, and you think, oh, it's a great pollinator, but it is not one of the best pollinators. It is the mason bee. Scientific study, they say 250 mason bees can do the work of 600 honeybees. And how do you attract mason bees to your garden? They're a little different looking. Yes, they are different looking. You've seen them a lot of times on maybe garden magazines or online, or you see them at the local garden center. These little kind of houses that have these tubes in them, and that's exactly where they live. They don't live in a hive condition. They're more a solo, type of live. And you get a mason bee house, and you can put it in your garden, and it's very architecturally appealing. Uh, you know, adds another element to the garden. Give an anchor and put several mason bee houses out. And you I put 2 because you gotta change those little tubes, and if you miss the right timing on it, they'll move away. So you have 2 going, and you don't have to mess with. You can move back, cycle 1 or 2 in there. But the mason bee will actually do more pollinating in your garden than a honeybee. So attracting mason bee to your garden is putting one of those bee houses up, and you'll see them, and they're two. You go online, you can buy them, 30-40 bucks for a nice one. You can go, some of these bee houses can be really expensive, and you're paying more for the architectural appeal, their custom work. They're very, very attractive, make a nice addition to any landscape. We're talking about anchor things, in the garden, mason bee house is always adds another structural element to the garden. Or the landscape, you want to have a structural element, whether it be even you can have a bronze sculpture or a concrete sculpture. You can finish it to like concrete or terracotta sculpture. There's one way to do. And they really bring the landscape up to another notch. You look at all well-designed landscape. There's a few that don't, but they have magnitude. They make up for that with magnitude. We have in a smaller landscape, because the property is small, they use a structural element to bring it up. While in a large garden, they can use magnitude as a structural element, because they plant, instead of the plant 20 rudbeckias, they plant 500 of them. So that has a certain element. But a bold adding a boulder to a flower garden or into your landscape is another great structural element. An arbor, pergola, a half wall, you could be a sitting wall. That will really bring the landscape, to another level. A fountain, of course, we build custom fountains, do it the old school way. But you don't have to do it that way. I mean, it's a little more, more expensive, but they look complete, all made out of natural materials, and they'll last forever. We put actually a miniature, kind of like a miniature swimming pool system in there, and the pump is not inside the fountain. It's a long ways away. But, a fountain in the garden, gardens with just a boulder with a tube drilled through it, and then it's a fountain coming out of that, and that's fine. That's one thing you could do. Have concrete fountain. That would be a great element in the garden. When you're looking at it, well, fountains too, and you're looking at adding a structural element, whether it be a boulder or fountain, you got to keep in mind the scale. You know, y- I think it's always better to go larger, just like containers. If you people who buy containers, they buy these little containers. They're not just larger is always better on buying a container. You can fill it with more. You get a larger pot. You can make more. A container can show more abundance, more exuberant plant. in a container, then a large container, than you could do in a small container. That's, I think, the biggest mistake people do when they buy containers. Large, go larger always. You never, rarely a mistake will be made on having too large. If you wanted to create a pastoral scene, let's say if you have a little larger landscape or you have a larger backyard and you love the pastoral or the natural landscape, a beehive, you're not even using it. A couple beehives out there, they don't cost a whole lot, but that creates that pastoral scene that you want. You're trying to, when you're landscaping, you're evoking emotions, thoughts, ideas, color, texture, all those things come into play in evoking it. Just like looking at a painting, it's provoking you to think about things, and these things are provoked by certain ideas and concepts that we have in our mind. And so, a beehive, if you're having a pastoral scene, is definitely worth installing and not hard to take care of. You don't even have to have bees. Just put it in the backyard, and it will create that atmosphere. Fireplace is a great thing, to put in a landscape, and it has a practical and functional use. It's a place of walking area. Welcome back to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living, whether it be your pond, your pergola, how to add a structural element to the garden. Your landscape is very important. If you want to bring it up another notch, that all an important element to add. And you want to match it to, what style you have. One time I went to a guy's house, and his wife says, "Please help my husband." They were going to do a landscape, and he's got one week he goes to the Home Depot and he got some whimsical wheel, and then next week he likes Japanese garden, so he's adding all these mixtures. It's got to be a coherent, cohesive the element that puts it kind of ties everything together and reinforce what you're trying to create in that picture that you're drawing. And the only thing the versus a landscape and a painting is that a landscape or a garden has transitional units from each season, but you're actually creating a painting in living material, and it's going to be a transitional picture. It's kind of like a kaleidoscope. You're spinning. Each spin creates a different, appearance, but it's still a cohesive unit of structure. So that's too not to want to get too complicated. Make sure you pick something that blends well with your house, the color theme that you're producing. But they're definitely, when you pick the right one, it will definitely to bring you to another. Talking about, people always talk about, music. Does music affect the outcome of your plant? Absolutely. Absolutely. Scientific proven that music affects the outcome of your plant. And what type of music? Classical music. Rock and roll has a negative on plants. I don't know why. Because it's the sound wave. And now the recent studies have shown that birds wake up the plant, that they're actually causes the stone. The birds singing in the morning accelerates the opening of the stomas in the plants where they start growing. It's a wake up call, birds, and they have that frequency in their chirping, and the same chirping is in classical music. So when you hear the bird out there chirping in the morning, they're doing more than one thing. In that chirping noise, they are waking up the plants. Amazing. It's complicated. The things are complicated and wonderfully made. But another thing about, really a little bit of a trivia thing, pursuit of plant trivia, cactus. Why are the saguaro cactuses and a lot of those pillar type cactus have those vertical, and which is an amazing. And that when it rains, and it doesn't rain often, so the plants have to be very adept to storing water, and that's what they basically do is store water in cylinder. Is whether it be a barrel cactus or saguaro, or any of those types, of cactus. The pleating is so that when the plant absorbs water, that it can expand easily. So when you have, if you grow tomatoes, and if you have all of a sudden you have a surge in water, they'll crack. The apples, a lot of fruits will do that. Well, the pleating allows them to expand. and contract without damaging the outer tissue. And the ridge do that. They're on each thorn. They they have these little at the base of the thorn. They have these little filaments, and the filaments collect the moisture out of the night air, allow the water to run down those ridges out of right at the base of the thorn. There's a bunch of filaments, and the humidity in the air or the collects on the filaments, and then it gets to a certain level and it drips down, those ridges to the base of the plant, and that's how it gets watered. Normal drought area, and because of this in Morocco and a lot of states, they've developed by observing plants and how they collect water in these desert-like environments, where it doesn't rain for 5 years. They've observed this in certain areas of the North Africa where they and a lot of fog but no rain. They have made partitions that they raise up. I mean, they're big, and they actually the water collects on these nets, so to speak, and collect water, and they drop down, and there's enough water. They collect enough water to supply the water needs of small villages just by doing that, which is they all got by observing what plants do and how do they collect water. So there's a little of trivia, plant trivia that, is kind of interesting. If you want to create an edible element to your landscape, you don't have to have they have these food forest guys that, everything they plant is a way to produce fruit. And that's nothing wrong with it. If you love, if you want to have a little bit of it, you don't need to have a 150-foot perennial bed by 25 feet. But if you want a little bit of it, an edible garden, we'll tell you how to do. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden, Landscape, and Design. We'll be right back with the other side of the...
For my truck guys, there isn't going to be a need for an explanation. I've got a 2017 2500H L. Let's get into 17 2500H L5P Duramax diesel with only 25,000 original miles. Truck's leveled up on a set of 35s. Inside is absolutely spun. Still has the true 6-speed Allison transmission in it. It's full-wheel drive. If you're looking at Ass Daily or a work truck, hit us up. Key Automotive in. What?
777. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden, Landscape, and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living. If you have problems with your pond, your pergola, or you're trying to decide which type of brick to put in your brick bath, we can help you, get you along. We've installed, some thousands and thousands of bricks, tens of thousands. That's what you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045, 855-765-1045. How to have a portion of your garden, if you wanted an edible garden in your landscape, is getting more and more popular, creating a portion of your landscape into usable landscape, which has beauty and also produce something. One of my suggestions was mulberry, of course, and persimmon. If you're looking for dwarf mulberry, they pretty much have fruit on them all year round. And persimmon, they're going to be late fall. But what you want to do is put a line of these trees, probably 3 or 4, depending on your appetite. You could have one persimmon on the right, one on the left, and put 2 dwarf mulberry in place. To blend with the landscape, you can use ornamental grass. Miscanthus, as your underplant would be a great one. Of course, you can use the popular grass. You could use pink muley grass, pink muley grass, or white muley grass, white cloud. Muley grass comes in another color. It's called white cloud, and it's very, very beautiful. I'll tell you this: if you fertilize your muley, you're going to get a explosive flowering. I mean, I've fertilized and didn't fertilize. I mean, I've really fertilized this one location where we really wanted to have muley grass flowering, and it's amazing. The difference is if you put a little bit of fertilizer, let's say 2 or 3 applications on your muley grass, you'll get at least maybe 100% improvement, maybe 120% improvement over flower power. They can really do amazing. But miscanthus is a grass that's probably the most underused grass in our zone, and is probably one of the best grasses, ornamental grasses in our zone, because of one, it's deciduous. And so it will lose its leaves in the winter, so you don't have to worry about cutting it back. You cut back, but it will look. So there's how to have a edible garden. But we're going to go to Jason. He has a question in the south side about pomegranate. Oh no, bougainville. Oh, yes, that always happens with bougainville. Is it in the irrigation? Do you have irrigation? Oh, large pot. Oh, I could tell you what to do. That's the simplest thing to. It's contrary to what you think. I would turn the pot on the side so it doesn't get any rain. Let it completely dry, dropping the leaves. And then when it does that, when it drops the leaves, it's almost leaf. Make some Miracle-Gro and Miracle-Gro rose fertilizer and some fish emulsion and you want to put at least 3 applications in standby, because it's going to look like a bougainvillea you see in a magazine or in the store right before to get you in there. It will look that good. I'm telling you, but you got to let it dry out completely and let it almost drop its leaves. As soon as it does that, put 2 or 3 applications of that Miracle-Gro rose fertilizer. Miracle-Gro rose fertilizer and fish emulsion, and stand back for the firework. No, you got to let it dry out. Once you let it dry out, we maintain a couple tropical gardens, and we do that all the time. And the homeowner always said, "Man, that's amazing." You just turn them on the side, let them dry. They love that dry out stress. That stress really brings them into. But Jason, call us back and tell us about how great it looks when you get it all done. Thanks for the call. Great. We're going to go to Steve. He has a question about his zoysia grass. Oh, Steve, we might have a little technical difficulty. What was I talking about? All right. We were talking about edible gardens, and also, water is great for our plants. We tell how plants get water when there's no rainfall for 5 years. There's a way that nature has worked it out. But in place of that, we have affordable water. Are the water experts in your home? If you have a well, it's not tasting that, you want to get, the hardest water, that we can get. And you want to get a reasonably priced bottled water. Make your own bottled water. Maybe one of those copper thermoses that, antibacterial, and carry your own water instead of paying, water, some of these nice expensive waters, $3, $4 for a quart, what would we be doing if gasoline was the same price as water? We pay these ridiculous prices for water, for a small bottle of water, $3, $2, and we get a gallon of gasoline, it's, for the same amount. It's just, so go to Affordable Water can provide you with great water. You want to give them a call at 904-260-0196. And if you were thinking about a water softener or getting your softener service, they are the experts. 904-262-0196. Hello, Steve. How you doing? I'm doing great. Black at the root levels? At the root? Oh, did you have the soil tested, Steve, before? And what did the soil tests come back? Right. What about the pH? What is the pH? Okay, so you think you adjusted the pH to 6 point in the grass? The roots are blackened. There's no roots. So, did you put manganese? Over the top or on? Okay. Well, I wanted you to send me some pictures at text me pictures at 4346197. And you're in Orange Park. I'm going to say that you may have a little bit of rhizoctonia, because if you put manganese down and you follow the directions, the pounds per 1,000 square feet, right? Then you probably have some rhizoctonia. How much times are you watering? Okay, perfect. You know what I mean? So, the 2 different things I would do. How big are the spots? Let me just make sure I get this. How big are your? Okay, 2 feet about. So green, but I think you have a little bit of rhizoctonia. in order to save money and cost, you could do this 2 different things. I would apply some fungicide in this case because you have a lot of money invested and you don't want to have a failure. So I apply some fungicide. Just get fungus control for lawn. Any fungicide will knock a rise off. The second thing I would get some by Sunny, palm fertilizer by Sunny, and apply that to the and then you of course apply it to the lawn. Do the whole lawn because that means that some of the trace elements are out of around there. You don't have all the things but you're more than welcome. I'd recommend that you'd send a couple pictures to my okay, no, 904-346-1970. Send a couple pictures. I'll look and I'll help you get through it. No problem. We'll save the lawn. We won't let it. None 970, the year I was born. I was born way before. Okay. All right. Have a great weekend, Steve. All right. We're going to go to Jim and he has a question about his pomegranates. Any pomegranates, I noticed that any of the pomegranates that are available in our local garden center are available, are good for our climate. So if you go to, let me see, I'm trying to think who would pomegranate. There is, have you tried, let me see, there's a guy, Phillips, sometimes he carries pomegranate. Or you can go online. There's the pomegranates that will grow online, and I love pomegranates because they're very nice fruit and they're high reward because if you buy a pomegranate, they're almost $5 a piece. Depends on the size. Yeah, they're expensive, and they furnish all the antioxidants, and they're great for. But some of the good for our climate zone are wonderful, and also I'll spell it out for you: SAVATSKI. Those are some great ones this one's a little more high cold tolerant. It has it's a sweet, it's kind of has a sweet tart type. And let me see what other, I'll spell it out. Well, let me look and see here. They're self-pollinating. But if you could have a pollinator, if you could have 2 different types, it all work. Here's another one. I checked the spelling. It's yeah, go ahead. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Well, that's terrible. That's a good question. When you're picking pollinators for your plums or your peas, you should look up the type of pollinator that goes with that one. So you don't run into situation, you know what I mean? So, but I got the spelling of it because my spelling is not that great. So I looked for it's PARFIANKA, PARFIANKA, and that's a very low chilling one. So it's going to produce, put a little bit of compost in the soil before you plant, and they're pretty much on their own. I have pomegranates in the landscape because of just the flower. Some of the flowers are spectacular. They're a great fruit to grow in our design, and we are talking about outdoor pomegranates. Pomegranates are a great thing for our climate. Christine is another great one, getting around 6 to 12 feet tall. They can grow in that sandy soil. They're originally from Afghanistan, the part of the world they're from, so they're going to be very drought resistant, and they can take that high temperature. But there's a lot of great ones, and pomegranates being considered maybe as a crop in the state of Florida. The citrus business is pretty much a done deal, because we, messed ourselves up with it. But pomegranate not only produce tasting fruit, which are good for in relative carefree. There's nothing as carefree as but they're along that line. They're not sensitive, but as long as you get them in the right position and get them watered correctly, they're going to be low and producing great fruit. But pomegranates, people don't realize that they make a flower that are some of their flower known for their flower versus their deep flowers that are pomegranates. Some of the pomegranates would rival the rose type flower with many. and to make great shrub for the garden. Unfortunately, people really don't grow that many, but I've grown them before myself, and they are a beautiful shrub, like a camellia. There's some plants that would definitely rival the rose. Peonies, they rival the rose as far as beauty of the flower. And the varieties of pomegranates, they'll have a flower that's probably 2.5 to 3 inches, depends on the fertilizer. The California sunset is a beautiful one. It's kind of an orange, white flower, beautiful, and produces a bunch of flowers on a pomegranate bush. No, Luteum plena is a kind of a creamy white variety. Very, very, very nice flower. I mean, look, if you could paste that flower onto a rose bush, and you think it was Flora Plenty is another that's you can get them online. They'll be a little pricey, because you have to buy them online. They're definitely worth growing, and they love our climate conditions. And what kind of care you have to give them? Zero almost. And if you want, like I said, a good performance, they're going to produce at very low maintenance. And if you want above average performance, a little bit of fertilizer 2 or 3 times. Toyo Show is another pomegranate flowering, but they're worth putting in a garden in the landscape, and it can, it's definitely a great. Talking about crepe myrtles, people always call me. They have an old crepe myrtle that doesn't produce flowers. My crepe myrtles are probably. I bought them when they were large, so they're probably, I'm thinking, 35, 40 years. Did they slow down in flowering yet? But as soon as not fall, I started I did a little more aggressive fertilizer, and what was the flowering came back. That area, a lot of times where crepe myrtles, been planted, grows lower and lower. Remember when sandy soil goes lower and lower in nutrient value as the plant lives in there. So what I to revive my crepe myrtle, to revive that old crepe myrtle, to get it looking flowering, and I have two of them side by side, the same. Natchez is and one the application and one I didn't, and the difference between the two is I would say 200. It'd be 150 to 200. And I used Miracle Rose fertilizer and fish emulsion, and I put about probably 10 gallons every time I put it on there. I put it on there 3 or 4 times. I can't remember exactly. I think it was 3 times, but I may have done it extra. And I took a generous amount of meal organic and put that on the crepe, and boom, I was back in business. So you can revive those old crepe music. Thanks for having us this weekend. We will see you next weekend, and we'll have some more great garden talk.